American University in Bulgaria.
This program is brought to you by AUBGTalks. For more, please visit us at aubg.bg/talks.
We would like to welcome you all tonight. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We would particularly like to thank Ambassador Aramaz for joining us here from the embassy in Sofia from Turkey. He's going to be speaking tonight on intercultural relations in the 21st century. He has over 25 years experience in Turkish diplomacy and has worked in Kazakhstan. I'm sure that we have a few from Kazakhstan here this evening. Has worked in also Afghanistan and has worked at the NATO embassy in Brussels. So we're very happy to have him with us tonight. He'll have a short presentation and then we'll open it up for questions. And I'm sure that we're going to have some interesting questions from our multinational student body. Yeah? Thank you.
I feel very excited to be here. Thank you very much. I hope I'll manage to live up to the billing. It's always nice to be invited to a university because I like being around young people with an open mind. I suppose retaining an open mind is in the nature of what you do anyway. Not only do you come across millions of ideas through your studies, but you also come across a lot of opinions from lecturers, opinions from fellow students. An open mind is good. I mean, I read once that the purpose of education was to replace an empty mind with an open one. So I'd like to think I have an open mind. I'd like to think I've gone through that already. Why is the subject matter important? In a sense, it's important because the challenge that faces the international community, I mean the whole gamut of East-West relationship, and by that I really mean, to be honest, Muslim-Christian affairs, international terrorism, the challenge of jihadism, the challenge of militant Islam, if you will. That is really a challenge that the international community cannot duck. It is one that has the potential to affect the whole range of relationships, from personal to social to international, as we move forward in the 21st century. And the subject is a challenge because at the close of the 20th century, I think the fabric holding the international community together has come under considerable strain. Obviously, 9/11 is the first thing that comes to mind. It was a great shock to the international system. It was something unexpected. And many in the international community didn't know what to do and how to respond. Obviously, things go back a little further than 9/11 also. Samuel Huntington obviously popularized the theory of clash of civilizations, but he wasn't the one who came up with the phrase for the first time. He is not the one to coin the phrase. Bernard Lewis, Professor Bernard Lewis, the very prominent historian, British historian, was the first to coin the phrase clash of civilizations. He came up with this phrase in a seminal article that he wrote back in 1990 or 92. I can't remember. The title was The Roots of Muslim Rage. The Roots of Muslim Rage. And I think it still is a seminal read. You could spend an evening in much worse ways than by studying it. But he put it in what I think is the right way. He didn't say a clash of civilizations was inevitable. He simply said, if we're not careful, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, we're going to end up in a dead end. and we might have a clash of civilizations in our hands. I'd like to say, my opinion, for what it's worth, that Samuel Huntington somehow latched onto this idea and commercialized it. Actually, when he first came up with his article, if you'd like to go back and check it, his article had a question mark at the end. Clash of Civilizations? But he was stunned. He was stunned by the commercial success of his article. And by the time he decided to capitalize on it and his book came out, the question mark had gone. He was more set in his ways. He was sure, cocky almost, if I may say so, in his observations. He was forthright. He didn't want to consider alternatives. He said, how could I possibly summarize, in 2 or 3 sentences what he said? He said, basically, perhaps in so many words, that there are irreconcilable differences between religions. If you're a Muslim, you're irreconcilable with Christianity. If you're a Turk, you're irreconcilable with a Russian. He also said, again, in so many words, our common history is one of unbroken tension and conflict. He also said the long-running international problems from the Middle East to the Pakistani and the conflict, he said these are civilizational issues. We just haven't realized that these are civilizations. But they are, he said. And he implied, he didn't say it in so many words, but he implied that there is a hierarchy between cultures. So, in a way, French culture is better than Syrian culture, or Norwegian culture is better than an Algerian one. And he also said the clash of civilizations isn't really a theory anymore. My book is out. It's already on the way. It's inevitable. It's already happening. So you might as well come to terms with it. So, in a way, during the 90s, when the Cold War came to an end, we've moved into a dangerous phase. And when 9/11 came along, we were really at a loss. And this is the reason. During the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, when I was a student in the UK, there was a very passionate debate about international affairs. We all spoke about, class warfare, if you will, imperialism, arms control, nuclear disarmament, and we debated. We said, you're wrong, you're a fascist, you're this, you're that. We debated. People debated in cafes, in conference halls. And now, on East and West, Muslim Christians, we don't talk anymore. We simply assume being a Muslim is incompatible with being something else. You can't be a Muslim and a Democrat. You can't be an Easterner and a liberal. We don't talk about it, and we just take it for granted. And I suspect it's not just because Samuel Huntington happened. It's not just because 9/11 happened. And it's not just because Taliban happened or Al-Qaeda happened. But a collection of events to which the international community simply didn't know how to respond. When I turned up in Afghanistan, I went there after spending 4 years at NATO, at the Turkish mission to NATO, with a particular worldview that NATO instills in you. And after my time in Afghanistan, I went back to NATO for another 4 years. I can tell you I was a different person by the time I went back to NATO for the second time. Because in Kabul, I thought, here are a set of people who are at the mercy of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, many of whom wanted a simple way of life for their children, for their families. Yet they were at the mercy of a great international confusion, uncertainty, misunderstanding, lack of understanding, call it what you will. And what are the reasons for the ease with which Samuel Huntington got away with his theory? Why is it that we've never challenged him while he was around? May he rest in peace. We never challenged him. How come he got away with it? We made it easy. The international community made it easy for him. The Arab world made it easy for him. The West made it easy for him. Everyone did. Why? There are several reasons for that, and I want to touch upon some of them. One of them is that the Middle East problem removed any vestige of self-respect from the Arab world. The 67 war destroyed whatever coherence the Arab world may have had. It destroyed its self-confidence. It instilled in the Arab world a sense of defeatism. We Turks don't understand this. We are Muslims, but we are not Arabs, so we don't understand this defeatism. You know, we fought with Western countries many times. We won sometimes, we lost sometimes, but we never said, oh, we're bound to lose, we're Arabs, we're always going to lose. There is this lack of, this 67 war destroyed this confidence, or whatever confidence the Arab world may have had, and their inability to do anything about, say, the conditions on the Gaza Strip. I mean, you know, David Cameron went there and called it an open-air prison, you know, and it was that bad. But that sort of inability to do something about one of your problems, it really removes your confidence. That's one. Secondly, the Arab world also has been unable to acquire for itself, until recently, a state structure or political system which delivers modernity and prosperity. Because it has consistently and heartrendingly failed to provide anything to its people, really the Arab model of statehood, the Arab regime, if there is such a thing, the Arab model has lost any relevance to the modern day. It has lost any legitimacy it may have once had. For such a long time, regimes from Syria to Egypt to Algeria got away with it because of two reasons. One, they said, aha, we have to have political unity, otherwise there is no way we can handle the Arab-Israeli conflict. So we have to be strong in the face of the big enemy, which is Israel. So this was the first thing they beat their people with. The second thing is, we have to have national unity, otherwise there will be Islamic terrorism, or there will be an Islamic way of government, so we have to be vigilant. They said we have to have our way of life, our way of government, because unless we do this, we'll have this. So, and they fooled, to some extent, the Western world for such a long time. Condoleezza Rice, in 2005, in my opinion, issued an important message. She said, for 60 years, the United States and the West pursued stability in the Middle East over democracy. Stability over democracy, and ended up with neither. This is a very important message. We chose stability over democracy, and we've ended up with neither. This is another thing. But because we did that, it was easier later on, after 9/11. It was easier for the international community to be lost in its thinking, to be muddled in its thinking, as to how to devise a credible and relevant and practicable challenge to the ideological warfare that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda was waging on the Western world. Now we know what to do. We've gathered our thoughts. I think the West is winning, is recapturing the ideological initiative from the Taliban, from Al-Qaeda, from the children of Zarqawi, people of their ilk in the Middle East. Samuel Huntington also got away with it because, I must say, to be honest, the West also has a problem of legitimacy in the Third World. There are several reasons for that. One is, let's face it, in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, the West, and sometimes interchangeably, I include Turkey in the West, and when I say Muslim countries, I include Turkey in that. Maybe we're a bit of both. Maybe that's why I'm muddled. I can understand maybe to some extent both camps, but maybe not enough of either. But one of the problems was that the West failed in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s to support reform movements in the rest of the world. We looked the other way when the Third World was trying to grapple with its challenges of what to do about women's rights in Islamic countries. This is a very difficult issue. Very difficult issue. The next time you see a lady in a hijab or a guy in a dish dash, consider or remember me. It's very difficult. What do? Do you go up to the lady and say, look, there is a modern way of life now, there is internet, why don't you take off your... She's going to tell you to get lost, because that's how she's been raised. That's how she's been encouraged to think. That she's only worth something if she's covered in black. And secondly, the West also lost, to some extent, its ideological superiority in the 90s. In the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, the West did have ideological superiority because there was, on the other hand, obviously the Warsaw Pact, which has come to pass. Obviously that has given the West a moment of glory, a triumph. But after that, now everybody is pursuing market economics. Everybody is pursuing, at least in theory, a democratic way of life. But does that equate to monopoly on future orientation, ideological monopoly on the future orientation of the world? No, because the Third World, in that, mostly the Middle Eastern and African societies now, the Third World has been latching on to the internet age, globalization age, and waging its own battle against its own demons. See, in other words, they have the right to say, we're doing it ourselves. We've done it ourselves. When you look at the Arab Spring, which unfortunately has been turning into a bit of a winter, but they're doing it themselves. They've largely done it themselves. They've done it themselves. In Libya, the West dithered, hesitated, prevaricated, took one step forward, thought about it again, and it was only when the tipping point had been reached by the Arabs themselves did the West decide to go in militarily and help out the insurgents, shall I say. Until then, we didn't really provide the goods. In fact, my prime minister at first said, NATO has no business in Libya. That's what he said. NATO has no business in Libya. And in the end, what happened a few months later? NATO went in. And we had to go in. Otherwise, here was a regime that was blatantly butchering its own people. Unfortunately, that's what is now happening in Syria. And we can talk maybe a little bit more about that. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I have this temptation to want to stop so that we can have a lively question and answer session. But obviously, I want to gather my thoughts before I'm invited to keep my peace, keep my counsel. What do we do? Where do we go from here? I've only given you a diagnosis, if I may. I haven't offered a prescription. I think Samuel Huntington got it wrong. I think our common history isn't one of unending, interminable tension and conflict. This is definitely not so in the Balkans. Obviously, you have to take my words with a pinch of salt because my words, they're coming from a Turk. But I think the Balkans have fared over the centuries a lot better than the rest of the continental Europe. Just consider the 100-year war. 114 years it took, actually, for it to come to an end. Nearly 7 million people died. 7 million people. Obviously, that includes people who've died because of bubonic plague, etc., etc. We don't have precise numbers on how many died of plague and how many died of warfare. But so many people died, several million. 30-year war, at least another 7 million died there. Again, there was the Black Plague this time. But when you talk to a German, I hope there isn't one here, they think the 1648 Peace of Westphalia is the best thing since sliced bread. It is not. The Peace of Westphalia was good in the sense that even the worst peace is better than the best war. So it was good in that sense. But it's not good in the sense that it was built on a very false premise, a bad premise, that is actually highly relevant today. You know, if ever you've had the misfortune to read through the Peace of Westphalia, I know at least one person in this room who will have spent time reading it, Madame Gredova. Central thesis of the Peace of Westphalia: if your prince happens to be a Catholic, you have to become a Catholic. If your lord happens to be Protestant, you have to become a Protestant. That is the gist. Obviously, it's thick. I mean, the Peace of Westphalia is a big document. But reduce it to its fundamental core. You know, when you're revising the night before your final exam, that's the principle. If you happen to be a Catholic, but your lord is a Protestant, bad luck. You have to you have to do the same. I mean, there's a very lively Latin phrase for it. I can never say it properly. Please don't laugh at me if I try. Ius regio, cuius religio, something like that. Whosever region, his religion. So if you're living in a Catholic region, in the region of a Catholic prince, I'm sorry if you're a Protestant, because you no longer are a Protestant. And that's a terrible thing to do. Let's face it, that's a very personal thing to be. If your parents happen to be Christian, if you have parents who have decided for you that you're Catholic, you want to remain a Catholic. That's what it is. And if you've had the additional fortune of being born a Muslim, you want to remain that way. Because I mean, why change? But I have to say. And you know, in Germany, do you wonder why there are cities such as Freiburg? Why is it Fry? Because they were islands of common sense. You could be whatever you wanted if you managed to get into the walls of that city. Nobody asked you what you were anymore. If you made it that far, you were a made man. Freiburg, really. So this has never happened in the Balkans. I think the Ottomans never, on the whole, Madame Gradova can correct me. Please do if you should. We never, more or less, interfered with people's faith as long as they pay taxes. Obviously, the sultans care about their taxes, or the taxes collected and levied, than the faith of the individual. And look at the Second World War. How many people died in the Second World War? 55? How many Russians? 20 million? So this is carnage. So this sort of carnage has never taken place in the Balkans. So in that sense, you know, when next time people talk to you about Balkanization as if it's a very pejorative, very negative phenomenon, please remind them of the 30-year War and the Peace of Westphalia, or maybe the Congo Free State set up in the 1880s. Congo Free State. Anybody, if you have 5 minutes, just Google it. How many people died? Around 8 million. 8 million people died in the Belgian Congo. I hope there is no Belgian here to mug me after the conference, but I'm, for what I'm a man of my word. I'm not going to shirk. But 8 million people nearly. And there was also, a display of severed right hands. And this is one of the seminal experiences that I've gone through. In Belgium, there is a display. In the rubber plantations, if you failed to meet your quota, soldiers came in and severed your right hand. And they collected the right hands and they took them to the capital to display these hands as a warning to others. And there were cases when a father would say, please don't remove my hand, because come next year, how am I going to pick up your rubber and feed my kids? So the soldiers would say, okay, then what should we do? Remove my son's right hand or remove my daughter's right hand. This has happened too. So let's put things in perspective. So I'm talking about this because I want to say basically the West doesn't have a monopoly on decency. There are decent people in other parts of the world. Obviously, there are killers everywhere, and there are madmen everywhere. And unfortunately, we happen to find ourselves living next to one in Syria at the moment, who doesn't mind shelling a town just because it's held by opposing forces. When you fire artillery pieces on a town, You're simply saying, I don't care who these shells kill. They can kill women, children, the elderly, people of not fighting age, people who just want to go about their own business. So, I digress. I'm sorry. What do we do? Do we let things fester as they are? If we do, next time the Taliban does something in Afghanistan, next time Zarqawi's apologists or supporters do something in the Middle East, what are we going to think? If you happen to be sitting opposite a TV set and you hear on the TV that in Pakistan there is another bomb at a mosque or at such a cultural center killing 55 people, or there was another car bomb or an improvised device, what a lovely name, improvised, as if it's an improvement on anything, killing 100 people in Iraq. I mean, this has happened a lot, unfortunately. Next time it happens, what are you going to think? What are you going to think? I mean, we all need an answer in our heads. Otherwise, we won't be able to respond to something. And when we can't respond to something, we either reject it or we find it alien or we somehow accuse ourselves for not being able to understand it, for failing to come up with an idea. We need an idea. Next time we see something, we see carnage committed in the name of religion. Let's face it, that's what the problem is. We need an idea. The idea is, in my opinion, the first idea, and this is the first step of my prognosis, therefore the first step towards winding up my modest contribution, let's accept each other as we are. That's what it is. That's the message of the 21st century. We can no longer say, oh, you are a Shiite, you're a Sunnite, oh, you're a Catholic, you are this, you are that. We are what we are. We should never, ever question. If people want to live a particular way, Malia, just live the way you want to live. And this is the way to go forward in the 21st century. Otherwise, we are really failing one important test of humanity. That's respect for the other person. If we don't respect the other person, we can't possibly hope to have a decent conversation. So the rule number one, we need to respect the other person. And there we say, and the corollary of that is, if you respect the person, you have to accept the way that person wants to live. That, honestly, my second prognosis, third suggestion, really immaterial. That's the first thing. We need to respect each other. We need to accept each other the way we are. We can't change each other once you're born in a particular way, especially once you are 20, 30, 50. That's it. You can't change anymore. So let's accept each other the way we are. Secondly, let's all accept we are equal. Equal citizenship. This applies to everything. This applies to everything. Whether we are talking about the Turkish minority in Bulgaria, Algerian guest workers in France, Turkish guest workers in Denmark, the Chechens in Russia, the Uyghur in China, Tutsis and Hutus, wherever they are in Africa, Bosnians, everywhere. Let's please accept everyone as equal. Equal citizens wherever they happen to live. That's the second suggestion I have. Anything else is a recipe for disaster. Anything else, whatever it is. Another thing you could do if you ever find yourself with an hour to kill one evening with a glass of wine, Amin Maalouf is a very prominent Lebanese French writer. Amin Maalouf. Honestly, whenever I feel down and depressed, I read this guy and I get even more depressed. Because this guy understands things. I mean, honestly, I shouldn't say this. I mean, I'm someone who has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. I shouldn't simply say this guy understands. But honestly, he's a very capable observer, and he has a leg in both camps. He is an Arab, and he has lived in France for a long time. He is Christian and a perfect French speaker, and a guy who understands the West. His family was from a small town in Lebanon. He's a very well-connected person, very well-connected writer, author, So he has seen both sides of the coin. And he, in one of his works, and if you don't mind making another suggestion, a very good book of his is called In the Name of Identity. In the Name of Identity. Amin Maluf. In it, he says, if you remove a person's identity, that person becomes a very dangerous person. So the first thing you do is you don't challenge his identity. If the guy is called Muhammad, let him be called Muhammad. If the lady is in a black, let her be. Another thing he says is that if you want to integrate someone, like a migrant community in the Netherlands, it's best to get the dominant culture in that country to reflect a little bit of the culture of that migrant community, so that when I'm the miner traveling on the morning bus to go down the shaft, I see something of my own culture reflected in the dominant culture of that society. So if I'm a miner in Germany, I see that German culture doesn't completely reject the Turkish culture that I've brought along in my bag. So there is no disrespect for, say, the doner kebab shops that you find on the every corner, whether you go and eat it or not. So you say, okay, let it be, the hamburger and the doner kebab. So there is enough space in our tummies for both. So that's what he said, the dominant culture in a society. He was really talking about the French society and the Algerians and the Moroccans. He was saying the dominant culture should reflect something of the subculture, if you will, of the guest community, the migrant community. We don't have to do that, of course. And if you don't do that, you come across the prognosis of Oliver Roy. R-O-Y it is spelled, Oliver Roy. Madame Grede was shaking her hand. At least somebody has a feeling. And this guy is a French writer, and he really does understand what he's talking about too. And he says most of the manpower, if you will, for want of a better word, most of the manpower for terrorist organizations in the Middle East goes from Western Europe. Not from the Badlands of Palestine or Iraq. Most of it goes from Western Europe, from the Netherlands, from France, from Belgium, from the UK. The 7/7 in the UK, the 7th of July. What year was that, 2005? God knows how many people died, 40 people, 500? Simultaneous bombs going on buses and trains, carried out by one of their own, a Pakistani student who had enjoyed all the trappings of the very best of UK education, along with his friends. They went along on a fateful trip and they planted bombs everywhere, killing so many people. So you either listen to Amin Maluf and we all come to our senses, or if you don't do that, you come across Oliver Roy. And then he says, migrant communities are a breeding ground for extremism. So that's a challenge, my friends. I had prepared 5 pages of prose, beautiful ideology, really earth-shattering observations, but one thing led to another, and I thought I would make it more spontaneous, if you will. I haven't depleted completely all my prognosis and all my suggestions, but once I listened to a swan song by a departing NATO ambassador who was swan song, a farewell speech when he was bidding farewell to the NATO Council. Each ambassador is invited to mumble on for about 10-15 minutes to say goodbye to his colleagues. And one very distinguished ambassador, as he was departing, said, "Never say everything you know on a subject in one go. Always keep something in your pocket for questions." With these thoughts, I wish to thank you for listening to me. I hope I wasn't too incomprehensible. Thank you very much indeed.
We will open the floor for questions now. So please, questions. Yeah. Excuse me, just one thing. If you could please, just before you state your question, just say first name and where you're from, please.
Okay. My name is Syrian. I'm from Bulgaria. In your personal opinion, what is the West, or more specifically NATO's, proper response to the Syrian crisis? What should NATO do, in your personal opinion? About the Syrian crisis?
Syrian.
It's a very topical question, isn't it? Well, actually, we are all grappling with the idea. And I mean, I've spent 8 years at NATO. I know the mentality. NATO is really like the Bank of England. It's the lender of last resort. You know, when you run out of money, you've got nothing else to do. That's your bank there. So NATO is really a deterrent. And it's a collection of sovereign countries. It has no armies. NATO doesn't have an army of its own. It has some AWACS reconnaissance planes. But everything it has is in the armies of its sovereign members. So in a way, we are NATO. When I first arrived in Brussels in 1997, we were only an alliance of 16 countries. Bulgaria wasn't even a twinkle in anybody's eye. But within a few years, Turkey was one of the countries, I must say, that worked very hard for Bulgaria's and Romania's entry into NATO. We also did it for ourselves, of course. We wanted NATO to come closer to our borders, but we put it into our legislation. When we were ratifying the membership of Poland, Czech Republic and Hungary, we said, unless the next wave includes Bulgaria and Romania, we will not allow it. So we are very pleased that Bulgaria is in it with us. As far as Syria is concerned, we have a 910-kilometer border with Syria, and the fundamental question is rather simple. What do you do if the regime in a neighboring country is butchering its own people? Obviously, there is no easy answer to this question, and everyone will have his own answers or her own answers. Whether you're an individual, you're a party, or a country, you need your own reasons. There can be no easy question. But the fact is, it's a question that cannot be ducked. You've got to have an opinion on it. What do you do? Obviously, you can say the life of one, the lands of Syria is not worth the bones of one Pomeranian soldier, did he say? Bismarck, or Prussian soldier? Prussian soldier. You can say that, of course, but the United States isn't saying that in Afghanistan. It has invested heavily in blood and money in Afghanistan in order to rise up to the challenge of terrorism. In a way, there is a similar challenge in Syria. Obviously, the question is less clear-cut than in Afghanistan. And the reason for that is that the opposition in Syria is divided, at least into three camps. One is the camp of the jihadists or the Islamists. They are the best organized, the most militant, and the best armed, if that is a proper term. They are the heaviest. They're heavily armed. They have more arms than all the others put together. The second grouping is the Kurds. And the third grouping, unfortunately, is the Liberal Democrats who want some semblance of Western democracy in Syria. They have no arms at all. So they are divided. Because they are divided, they don't have the legitimacy of a platform speaking with one voice. And also, let's face it, we've all underestimated the ability of the Syrian regime to survive. We thought he would wilt like our good friend in Libya did, Gaddafi did. And he didn't wilt, this guy. They are better built, they're longer lasting. That's because they've been around a long time. Huh? Remember how long Father Assad has been around. So he's been able to, the son has been able to call on a lot of favors that his regime had bestowed on people over the years. So there is unfortunately no easy question, no easy answer. One option is to declare a no-fly zone in Syria, but that's not easy to accomplish either, because the opponents, shall we say, the opposing forces, the insurgents, if you will, are not really grouped in one particular part of the country. They probably have most of the country under their control, but they are spread throughout the country. So in a way, a no-fly zone may be rather difficult to enforce. And if you can't enforce it, speaking from the view of the military point of view, if you can't enforce something, it's better not to declare it. If you declare something, you better, back it up with credible force to make sure that people observe it. Apart from that, we'll have to wait and see. Unfortunately, the tipping point hasn't arrived in Syria, like it arrived many months ago in Libya. Unfortunately, it's the will of the people at the end of the day that will decide the day. The people of Syria have to decide collectively just where they wish to see their country, say, in 5 years' time. Is it a liberal democratic country in which everyone is an equal citizen, everyone accepts each other as they are, the prognosis we spoke about earlier, or will the regime get away with claiming that it has the legitimacy to decide for everyone else what kind of country they live in? Because let's face it, when you're living in a totalitarian country, what do? You have the will imposed upon you by someone from above that claims to know better than you do. So we know what kind of society you should live in. We know what sort of clothes you should wear. We know what kind of terminology you should use. I'm sure that this is not completely alien to some people in Bulgaria. It hasn't been that long since that sort of ideology had thankfully disappeared from these lands. But it all comes back to that basic idea. Are we equal citizens? Are we taking each other as equals? If the answers to these questions are yes, then we don't have a worry. But the answers to these questions in Syria, unfortunately, are no. So until the tipping point arrives, either we say we will go in militarily, or we say we will wait until the people of Syria will speak with a clearer voice. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer. And my pay grade only allows me to speak in these terms. But they have been shelling our territory in Turkey. So far, we've resisted the temptation to do more than just double the number of shells they've sent to us. And so far, they've stopped. So, in a way, with one shell, they killed 5 people in Turkey, women and children. And the shells that land in Turkey can only come from a very particular type of Russian artillery that's only available in the Syrian army. So they can't fool us when they say, we don't, it could be the opposition who's shelling you. We may look stupid, but we can assure them we only look that way.
Next question. Other question. Yes.
Hello, my name is Adile Dima. I'm from the Turkish minority living in Bulgaria. My question is, what do you think about the intensification of the PKK attacks during the last months in Turkey, and why do you think that some of the Western countries are supporting this terrorist organization?
It's another difficult question. It's, I suppose there's no such thing as a free lunch anymore, but if we can, we need to distinguish between, if possible, the PKK outfit in Turkey and the average Kurd in the street. The average Kurd in the street is and should be, and I'm sure will be, entitled to the full range of political rights as everybody else in the country. I don't think anything else will do. I think we've made progress in this direction. We need more. We need more work. We have more work to do, and I am quite confident, as a Turkish bureaucrat, that within a not too distant future, we are talking 1 or 2 years, they will have all of the collective rights that they wish to see for themselves. I think on an individual basis, they all have the full range of political rights, but collectively speaking, collective rights, Turkey still has some way to go. Unfortunately, our shop in that sense is not in order completely. As far as the PKK outfit is concerned, I think it is no secret that the Syrians have been giving them extra material help. But there is something else here. One other country has been helping them out quite substantially to the east of Turkey. That country is run by Islamic clerics, ayatollahs. To them, we are the antithesis of everything they stand. they stand for. Turkey is a challenge to Iran because they want to see a theocratic regime in every country in the Middle East. They want to see an Islamic state, a state built on Islamic principles. And they want to, as you know, they want to wipe out a particular country in the Middle East. And they want to grab their hands on a particular technology, particular military technology. What do you do at the end of the day? Do you sit by and say, oh yeah, okay, go ahead, get your hands on that? Or do you say, well, maybe these guys shouldn't have access to that sort of technology? If the latter is your position, then you are the enemy. If you are the enemy, anything goes as far as they are concerned. They have the right to undermine you. They have the right to train people and send them into your country. They have the right to help your enemy. This is their worldview, unfortunately. So we have a problem with Iran. I think the international community has a problem with Iran.
Ivan. Hello, my name is Ivan, I'm from Russia, and I got a question about Russian-Turkish relationships, but more in the Russian-Turkish relationships, but more in the future. So right now, I think, I truly believe that they are very friendly, because Turkey approved the South Stream, Turkey get rid of the visas for Russians, etc. But as you know, upcoming elections in USA, Mitt Romney said that Russia is the #1 enemy, strategic enemy for US. And considering that US is like a big daddy for NATO, could in the future the change in US administration also somehow affect Russian-Turkish relations?
Very good question. That could be a lengthy thesis, actually, the answer could be. I think if Mr. Romney is elected, he will go through a slight change of heart. Let's not forget, it was United States leadership that got NATO to offer a partnership to Russia at NATO. There is a NATO-Russia Council at NATO. On that council, obviously, it doesn't make any decisions on behalf of NATO. It's a talking shop. It's a platform for dialogue, but it is a platform that offers Russia a full voice on a lot of issues that affect Eurasian security. So in that sense, let's not forget that it was the United States foresight that helped convince everybody else that the NATO-Russia Council was a good idea. And I speak from experience. We were on the side of the skeptics at the time, unfortunately. We're talking about 12, 13 years ago, though. A different world when we hadn't yet looked that far that far ahead, and somebody in Washington already had. So when you take office, that responsibility on your shoulders always moderates your thinking a little bit. So that's my #1 thing. Secondly, Turkey, Russia are very good friends, and I think we will remain that way. I hope I won't get the sack after tonight because I'm being quite forthright in my opinions for some reason, and I haven't been drinking yet. In the 70s, in the 60s and the 70s, Turkey made a mistake. We ignored the Soviet Union, and I think that was a mistake. We were threatened by the Soviet Union because, let's face it, militarily, the Soviet Union was a colossus. Russia still is. So we were threatened, and we ignored Russia. We ignored the Soviet Union at the time. And maybe, just maybe, we were the bigger losers in that relationship. Because, come on, let's face it, if you're the Soviet Union, the fact that Turkey really isn't talking too much or doing much business with you isn't really going to hurt you a lot. But I think Turkey should have cultivated a stronger cooperation with the Soviet Union at that time, based on mutual interests, of course, and sovereign equality. We didn't have that foresight or statesmanship. Sometimes I give that example to some of my Bulgarian friends who say, don't turn your back on Turkey. Don't just say, we are now in the EU, we don't need Turkey, we don't need to do business with Turkey. So look at us, we made that mistake. Did the Soviet Union suffer? Not really, we suffered more than the Soviet Union. Obviously, this example doesn't really correspond entirely to the relationship because we are much smaller than the Soviet Union was at that time. But this in a similar sense in that, neighboring countries sometimes ignoring one another or not fully appreciating the value of each to the other. But today, we've rectified that mistake. Since the late 90s, we've been very good friends with Russia. We do business a lot. About 3 million Russian tourists visit Turkey each summer. This is just the summer, not the rest of the period. And this is just for the tourist resorts, not the rest of the country. We are very pleased with the level of our economic cooperation with Russia. Our construction companies do a phenomenal business in Russia. And in turn, Russia is now building our own Belene in Turkey. For what it's worth, whether it's good or bad, Russia is building us our first nuclear energy facility in the south east of Turkey. 10 years ago, this would have been unthinkable. I don't believe that, coming back to the guesstimate as we look to the future, if it is an if Mr. Romney is elected, I don't believe it will place an undue strain on Turkish-Russia relationship. We will not commit mistakes of the past. And the United States has shown many times in the past that it can review its policy, and it can use that reviewed policy in a way so as to extract from the other side a better relationship. And who knows, if Mr. Romney is elected, maybe we will get a more responsive administration in Russia, one that engages more with the West. And that's not a bad thing. That wouldn't be a bad thing. Maybe what the West needs to do, really, maybe the European Union more than NATO, maybe the West needs to offer a better partnership to Russia. After all, the West thrives on Russian natural gas. Russia is on Europe's doorstep. Russia has the ability, the mechanics, let's say, not necessarily the intention, but the mechanics of making life uncomfortable for many countries in the West, because let's face it, you can't ignore Russia even if you wanted to. So it is a country with which the West needs to engage better, in my opinion. But NATO is not really suited for that because it's a defense organization. It's an organization of sovereign countries that really want to keep it as a lender of last resort, as I suggested earlier. But the EU is better placed for a more equal relationship with Russia. They've done a few rounds of sparring on trade and other things, and maybe they need to do a bit more.
I'm Boban Markovic, I'm from Serbia. Approximately a year ago, our guest here was Australian ambassador in Serbia, Mr. Ljubša Georgievski. I recall that he also criticized work of Samuel Huntington, particularly clash of civilizations as well. At that point, he says that he believes in plurality of our identities, and he believes that the European Union is big enough for all peoples from Balkans to live and exist peacefully. And I think that would be your message tonight. Yet, as Angela Merkel says that multiculturalism has been tested in Germany and failed. Do you see a particular message from Ms. Merkel or this government?
If you don't mind, I'm not going to lose much time with the European Union itself or our membership or Balkan membership. But I think Mrs. Merkel was right. Multiculturalism has failed, in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. With the best intentions, the West poured a lot of resources and effort into trying to integrate people of other cultures living in their societies. They've done it. I mean, they've made an effort. In my opinion, it was mistaken in its nature, but the effort was there. The money was there. They spent money. They expended considerable effort to integrate many of the the communities living among themselves. They just went about it the wrong way. How? I mean, in the late 70s, I went to the UK as a young student. I attended high school, late university, then did my master's degree there. But I always at that time remember feeling that migrant communities were getting away with a lot of things. I mean, earlier I said to you, the West needs to reflect better the culture of its, guest communities. That was one side of the coin. And in my attempt to finish quickly, I didn't give you the other side of the coin. The other side of the coin was that these migrant communities got away with murder, sometimes literally. Just consider honor killings. A lot of women, young girls are killed or murdered, let's say, by their parents in Western Europe because they go out with a boy, they drink. And a lot of Pakistanis do this, many North Africans. I must say some Kurds from Turkey do this. In some cases even, I'm more isolated, even some Turks. I'm not a bigot, I'm willing to allow that. We do that sometimes too. And it's a shameful act. It's something we should all be ashamed of. The ones who do that sort of thing. But honor killings are not the only thing. Many Muslim communities, minorities in Western cities are openly homophobic. I mean, when I was young, I suppose I was homophobic too, and like everyone else. I mean, when you come across something for the first time, you say, God, and then you sort of, avoid them. But society teaches you, or society moderates your reactions. Society encourages you to be a little more responsive. Earlier I said we need to accept each other as we are, and that includes people of different orientation, sexual orientation too. I'm married, 2 kids, so don't misunderstand me, but they are part of our societies. But these Muslim communities, very often, they reject, isolate, ostracize, call it what you will, people who are homosexuals. And that's unacceptable. And if you want to do that in Peshawar, if you want to do that in Kandahar in Afghanistan, okay. But if you want to do that in Birmingham, if you want to do that in Paris, that's unacceptable. You've got to come and at least sustain the standards you find in that society. That means you don't kill your daughters. You don't murder your daughters anymore for drinking or going out with a boy. You don't kill I have a 16-year-old daughter, honestly. Sometimes she goes to school and the skirt is here. Honestly, here. Some mornings I say, why don't you feel a bit chilly? You actually propose to go to school in that? And you obviously have a skirt at school in your lockers and that sort of thing. And she never takes the hint. She starts her stuff, goes to school. You've got to accept it. And I mean, you have daughters, 20 years down the line, mark my words, there is really nothing you can do or you should do. You just got to let them be. What did I talk about? Let's accept each other as we are. We are all equal. As a parent, I feel that I'm only a guardian in that sense, that I'm only taking care of her. When she's 18 in 2 years' time, she'll do what she wants. I'm trying to moderate her. At home, I said, look, here is the drinks cabinet. And they've been drinking my 12-year-old single malt whiskey, honestly. There's the red label, and it's there. There's the black label, that's there. And my Cardo, the best Scotch whiskey is gone. Did you do this by mistake? No, you tried that first. It was good. Bloody hell, that's 20 level. That's, 80 level. But there are many countries. It's unacceptable that we go around, some of these people go around killing, murdering others, and they get away with it because of multiculturalism. You know why? I saw this with my own eyes. Cultural relativism. I remember the term. I can't define it anymore. Madame Gredova, can you do that for me? I think cultural relativism is, look, this is terrible, but these are Pakistanis. This is good enough for them. It's good enough for them. Let them do it. No, let's not do it anymore. Let's have one set of standards that guide our actions. If it's not good enough for us, it's not good enough for the Pakistanis. Say, look, we don't kill our children. You don't kill your children in my society. If you want to come and live in London, you got to live a decent life. What did we do? What did they do in the 70s and 80s? Oh, we mustn't hurt their sensibilities. This is their way of life. If they want to kill their children, if they want to keep their children hidden in a basement, let them do this. Let's face it, that's not good enough anymore. So in that sense, multiculturalism is dead. What we need, one set of standards for everyone in a society, equal citizenship in a society. If they want to have their cultural colors, cultural expression, let them do it with the colors of a hat, or with their attire, with their food, with their music. But nothing more lethal, please. So in that sense, yes. She's not right about a lot of things, but she was right about that one.
We have time for about one or two more questions. Yeah.
My name is Kevin from the United States, and I was wondering, in your opinion, do you think that East and West are more divided now than, say, before 1991?
Who do you mean when you say East?
The Soviet Union, China, everyone. As opposed to the United States and NATO.
I would say the divide is no longer between the traditional West, whether it's a monolithic term that still applies, and the East. I know that the term doesn't apply anymore to the East because it's no longer a monolith. There is Russia, there is China, there is India, there is Pakistan, there is Iran even, especially if it gets hold of that technology. There is the Muslim world, there are the whole African countries that are trying to ride out of poverty. There is Latin America. I don't believe we can honestly, with a sense of assuredness, say East-West anymore. We can say, and we do say East and West when we mean, Islam and Christianity. When we can't say that, we say East and West. I think that shorthand still only just applies. But to that other sense, it doesn't apply. In that sense, we are not divided, no. Because globalization and travel has made sure that we instantly know what's going on in those societies. But do we always see eye to eye on everything? No, we don't. In that sense, yes, we are divided. In that sense, China is less willing to debate than it was in the 70s because it has become, let's say, cocky, as I used to say in London, because of their economic success. It's gone to our heads a little bit, hasn't it? I mean, they've built an impressive military armor, especially a naval one, which is causing a lot of jitters on a set of islands in the Pacific, shall we say. So in that sense, we are divided still, but I wouldn't say more divided. Let's say in the 80s, let's remember when I was at the London School of Economics, the catchphrase for a certain period of time, and we had a lovely lecturer called Fred Halliday, who passed away recently. He would always talk about MAD, mutual assured destruction. We don't have that anymore. It's maybe still assured if you don't behave, but it's not mutual anymore. We all understand the consequences. The D still applies. Destruction, the capability is still there, but it's no longer, I'm going to do this. We all know the pitfalls. We all know the consequences. So I'd like to think we are more aware of the possible consequences. In that sense, we are not divided. No, we are talking to each other more. There is more travel between statesmen. There are more things that ambassadors do. In the 70s and the 80s, I'm sure ambassadors didn't travel a lot. I mean, I almost never stop for any length of time in Sofia. I'm always out and about on the road. So it's a global village, really, in more senses than was the case in the 90s. But we are divided in the sense that East and West are not talking to each other as far as cultural issues are concerned, which goes back to what I said earlier. We never talk about it anymore. We are too polite to say, yes, I'm Christian, you're Muslim. It's just, let's not hurt each other's sensibilities. I think the time has come when we ought to, a little bit, step on each other's toes. politely, of course, accepting each other as equals. If we are equals, we should be able to make fun of each other as well. And I say that with a particular caricature or cartoon crisis in mind. The Muslim world should have been able to better respond to the cartoon crisis. It responded violently. It also responded violently recently to that obscure video that somebody had shot in the United States. It was mindless, but there is nothing, absolutely nothing that can justify the violence that followed it. Thankfully, there was nothing in Turkey. A few people made a few grumbling noises when that was that. People have died in other parts of the world, and that's unacceptable. In that sense, yes, we are divided.
I have one more question.
My name is Tamar, and I'm from Serbia. Earlier, before you quoted Amin Maluk saying that if you remove a person's identity, then a person becomes dangerous. And I want to apply this sentence to Middle Eastern countries. And I would, probably cite Iraq as an example of it. Iraq has Shia, Sunni, and Kurd. They are not minorities. They are quite big groups. When we talk about the respect, did West respect the identity of these people? Because Iraq is a constructed state. It is not a nation state. So when West tried to, I would say, enforce democracy to Iraq, it failed because it is not a nation state. So did we respect their culture? Did we respect their ideology? And don't you think that the fact that democracy failed in Iraq is related to the fact that we do not understand their culture, we do not understand how do they think? And I would say the same thing about Kurdish. Kurds do not have a state. They are divided into 4 countries. It's Turkey, it's Iraq, it's Syria, and it's Iran. In all of the countries, these states have problems with Kurdish minorities, and it's because their rights are not respected, and that's why they become dangerous. Do you think it's disrespectful what West has been preaching? They are themselves preaching their premise that we should respect minorities and identities.
I think democracy is an acquired taste in the sense that when a society is first born or is in the first stages of its development, the default mode is some kind of totalitarian rule, whether it's a monarchy, whether it's a Soviet type of system, whether it's a one-man regime like Gaddafi's regime, or Mugabe in Africa. And really, it's also like walking. If you're a baby, you can't start walking, without first at least trying to get on all fours, trying to sort of, move on your belly a little bit in the living room, trying to stand up, taking first tentative steps. So in a sense, democracy is a work in progress, except some Anglo-Saxon countries and Western Europe. We haven't got there. The rest of the world, I don't believe we've got there yet. We're all getting there. That's the ideal. It's the ideal that I think one way or the other, openly or overtly or covertly, we all aspire to. And that's right. That should be the way. As far as Iraq is concerned, I will have another admission to make. I really ought to get the sack tonight. I think at the time when the United States first intervened in Iraq, I was against the intervention. With hindsight, I think it's been good for the Middle East. Despite the fact that I found it distasteful at the time, that the West went in, it wasn't just the United States, it was the United Kingdom, it was Spain, it was quite a few countries went in. It was a bigger coalition than many of us were willing to admit. And at one stage, it also included a sizable Bulgarian contingent, if you remember, and Georgian too, and rightly so. Despite the fact that many of us found it distasteful, that intervention, I think now, in many ways it has served a bigger purpose than many of us were able to expect at the time. And that purpose is that function it served, the intervention, was that it showed the Iraqi people that there was another way. Until then, they were only used to one-man rule in the form of King Faisal. Afterwards, they had some obscure person, then they had Saddam. They had nothing else. And after the intervention, many people were saying, many people realized, there is an alternative. What happened since then was that the intervention lifted the lid, but not everything that was in the box was bad. Pandora's box did have quite a few things, and one of them was a box inside another box, and that box was the ballot box. The Iraqis never had that ballot box, and they have it now. And they have great pride in the fact that they were able to at least elect a government. It took them a number of months to hammer out a coalition, etc., etc. But let's face it, despite the number of people who've died in Iraq, it's been good for the Middle East. Who is to say that nobody took any inspiration from what has happened in Iraq, from Maghreb to Maghreb, from Palestine to Algeria? Even Hamas came to power in Gaza through the ballot box at first. They have since kicked the ballot box down the road, as some totalitarian people do, but they got to power through the ballot box. So the ballot box is very important. And in Iraq, that's what Bush Jr. gave them, the ballot box. And for the first time, the Shiites said, okay, I'm citizens now. I'm a citizen. We are citizens now. For the first time in their lives, the Kurds, they were able to say, I'm a citizen. Even the Sunni minority said, yes, I am a citizen because I'm able to cast my ballot, cast my vote. And that's a powerful symbol that there is something we can do collectively if we have the right mind to do so. And of course, a lot of people have died in Iraq. Let's not forget that. And in the earlier stages, I criticized in private conversations what I thought was the folly of Bush and Blair, that a lot of people have died. But let's face it, we are all at least questioning minds. Yeah, we all have a questioning mind. That's what I meant when I first came in to say, let's retain an open mind. If we have an open mind will go in and analyze the numbers. We all know how many people have died, but how many of them are Iraqi on Iraqi deaths? That's what an inquiring mind would look into, isn't it? How many of them are Iraqi on Iraqi? I would contend that an overwhelming majority are Iraqi on Iraqi. That's not really the fault of the United States or the United Kingdom or Bulgaria or Georgia who went in. It's the fault of the Iraqis. Why? Because democracy is a work in progress. There is still not enough people, or there are still some people who are not willing to accept the ballot box as the definitive answer to the pressing problems, the political problems of today. There are people still, proponents of Zarqawi and his ideology, his terrorist tactics, who seek answers in a religious book written 1400 years ago, or in a narrow understanding of nationalism, or this and that. For the first time, Iraqis now have an alternative to a one-man rule or to a rule with an iron fist. That's it. That's it. If it sounds simple, don't worry. It normally is that simple. Basic principles are obviously, honestly, in my opinion, are always easy to understand. It's people's intentions that sometimes obfuscate or camouflage those principles and make it hard for us to understand. Principles themselves are very easy, and in Iraq, they are there if you retain an open mind, which brings me to the opening question that I put to you. I hope we all retain an open mind as we look forward into the 21st century, because we're already 1 decade into the 21st century and people are still dying in many corners of the world. Many of them die because of religious bigotry, and unfortunately many of them, the overwhelming percentage of them, die at the hands of their countrymen. Not because the United States goes in and bombs Pakistanis, but because Afghans kill Afghans, Pakistanis kill Pakistanis. Tajiks kill Hazara, Hazara kill Afghans. Unfortunately, that's a sad fact of the day. Once I visited a Hazara village. It had never had electricity in its life. Never. I think the year must have been 2002. Can you imagine? It had never had electricity. I spoke to some people. They were unable to relate to the concept of electricity. What more can I say?
Thank you very much. We'd like to thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon here on campus. And you have... Okay, super, okay. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see some of you tomorrow.